Have you ever felt like you're drowning in plain sight? Like you're surrounded by people yet suffocating from something you can't quite name? Maybe you've noticed that despite having relationships, connections, and people who claim to care about you, there's still this hollow ache inside, this persistent feeling that something is slowly eating away at your peace, your confidence, your very sense of self. You're not imagining it, and you're not weak for feeling this way. What you're experiencing might be the subtle but devastating impact of people who are slowly destroying you from the inside out. Not with dramatic confrontations or obvious cruelty, but through 1,000 small cuts that you've learned to accept as normal. Joseph Droz understood this deeply when he wrote about the imperceptible malign influences that spring from corroding cares, griefs, and disappointments. He recognized that more than half of the human race dies not from physical ailments, but from sorrow, from broken hearts, from falling victim to the destructive passions of those around them. Today, I want to walk with you through 7 unmistakable signs that the people in your life are slowly destroying you. Not because I want to add to your pain, but because sometimes the first step toward healing is naming what's been hidden in the shadows. Sometimes the path to freedom begins with recognizing the prison you didn't even know you were in. If you've ever wondered why you feel exhausted after spending time with certain people, why your confidence seems to evaporate in specific relationships, or why you find yourself constantly walking on eggshells around those who claim to love you, this message is for you. It's time to stop gaslighting yourself and start honoring what your soul has been trying to tell you all along. The first sign that people around you are slowly destroying you is when you find yourself consistently overwhelmed by sorrows and disappointments that stem directly from your interactions with them. Notice I said consistently. This isn't about occasional disagreements or the natural friction that comes with human relationships. This is about a pattern, a relentless cycle where every encounter leaves you feeling diminished, confused, or deeply sad. Droz understood this when he observed that profound grief and disappointment could literally break a person's heart. When you're around people who are toxic to your well-being, you don't just feel occasional sadness. You carry a weight that seems to grow heavier with each interaction. You might find yourself crying more often, feeling hopeless about situations that should bring joy, or experiencing a kind of emotional exhaustion that sleep can't cure. Pay attention to this pattern in your own life. Are there people whose presence consistently brings you down, not because they're going through hard times and need support, but because their very way of being seems designed to drain your light? These individuals often disguise their destructive impact as care, concern, or even love. They'll tell you they're just being honest, just looking out for you, just trying to help you see reality. But here's what they're really doing. They're projecting their own inner darkness onto your world, and somehow you've accepted the role of emotional garbage bin for their unprocessed pain. Every time you interact with them, you absorb a little more of their toxicity, until you can't remember what it felt like to be genuinely happy. The tragedy is that you probably normalized this experience. You've told yourself that this is just how relationships are, that conflict and disappointment are inevitable, that perhaps you're too sensitive or expecting too much. But deep down, your soul knows the truth. It knows that love shouldn't feel like drowning. Connection shouldn't leave you depleted. Care shouldn't come wrapped in criticism and control. The second sign is more subtle, but equally devastating. You find yourself trapped in relationships characterized by incompatible temperaments that lead to persistent sadness. Droz wrote about how people bring their incompatibilities to a common stock, adding ruinous excesses of temperament together, only to awaken to the conscious and sober sadness of what they've created. This is about fundamental discord that goes beyond surface-level differences. This is when you realize that you and certain people in your life operate from completely different value systems, emotional languages, and ways of being in the world. Yet instead of acknowledging this incompatibility and creating healthy distance, You keep trying to force connection where none can authentically exist. Maybe it's the family member who thrives on drama while you crave peace. Perhaps it's the friend who sees the world through a lens of scarcity and competition while you naturally lean toward abundance and collaboration. Or the partner who needs constant validation and attention while you require solitude and reflection to recharge. The problem isn't that you're different. Differences can be beautiful when there's mutual respect and understanding. The problem is when these differences become weapons used against your peace. When your need for quiet is labeled as antisocial, when your optimism is called naive, when your boundaries are seen as selfishness. In these incompatible relationships, you find yourself constantly trying to translate yourself into a language the other person can accept. You dim your light so they won't feel overshadowed. You suppress your joy so they won't feel worse about their misery. You abandon your values so they won't feel judged by your choices. And what happens? You become a stranger to yourself. You lose touch with who you really are beneath all the accommodating and adjusting. You wake up one day and realize you've been living someone else's version of your life, and the sadness of that recognition is almost unbearable. The third sign is when you constantly find yourself surrounded by ambitious, false, or greedy individuals. Droz warned that when you yield yourself to the empire of ambition, you condemn yourself to live surrounded by people who are greedy, unquiet, and false. This isn't about people who have goals or dreams. It's about those whose entire identity revolves around getting ahead at any cost, including the cost of your well-being. These are the people who see relationships as transactions. They are friendly when they need something from you, distant when you have nothing to offer. They name drop, brag about their connections, and constantly compete rather than collaborate. In their presence, you never feel like you're enough as you are. There's always an implicit message that you should be doing more, achieving more, becoming more impressive. What's particularly insidious about these relationships is how they make you question your own values. You start to wonder if maybe you should care more about status, money, or recognition. Maybe you should be more ruthless in your pursuit of success. Maybe your contentment with simple pleasures is actually complacency. But here's what's really happening. Their relentless ambition and greed creates an energy field of lack and competition that's toxic to souls that operate from abundance and cooperation. Your nervous system picks up on their constant state of striving and anxiety, and it begins to affect your own sense of peace and contentment. You might notice that after spending time with these people, you feel agitated, dissatisfied with your life, or suddenly anxious about your future. You might find yourself making decisions based on fear rather than love, scarcity rather than abundance. This is their energy slowly poisoning your natural state of being. The fourth sign cuts deep because it reveals how you've learned to betray yourself to keep others comfortable. You find yourself sacrificing your principles due to fear of external judgment or blame. Droz observed that we sacrifice principles we esteem every day through fear of being blamed by people we actually despise. Read that again. We sacrifice what we value most to avoid criticism from people we don't even respect. How did we get here? How did we become so afraid of disapproval that we're willing to abandon our own moral compass? This happens gradually, almost imperceptibly. It starts with small compromises. You don't speak up when someone makes a joke that offends your values because you don't want to be seen as difficult. You go along with plans that don't align with your interests because you don't want to disappoint others. You stay quiet when someone spreads gossip because you don't want to become their next target. Each compromise feels minor in the moment, but together they create a pattern of self-betrayal that erodes your integrity from the inside out. You begin to lose trust in yourself because you've proven repeatedly that you can't be counted on to stand up for what you believe in. You start to feel like a fraud because there's such a disconnect between your inner values and your outer actions. The people who trigger this response in you might not even be consciously manipulative. They've simply learned that your fear of conflict and disapproval makes you malleable. They know that if they express disappointment, criticism, or withdrawal, you'll likely cave to their preferences. But here's the truth they don't want you to realize. Their approval was never worth the price of your soul. The respect you lose from yourself when you abandon your principles is far more costly than any external disapproval you might face. The fifth sign is perhaps the most tragic because it reveals how external validation has become your drug of choice. Your happiness depends solely on the approval and envy of others. Droz noticed that happiness, which doesn't glare in the eyes of the multitude, compelling them to take note, is no longer regarded as happiness by those trapped in this cycle. When your sense of worth becomes contingent on others' admiration or envy, you become what Droz called a victim of opinion. Your emotional state becomes entirely dependent on external circumstances you can't control. You're happy when people praise you, devastated when they criticize you, anxious when you're not getting enough attention, and empty when you're alone with yourself. This creates an exhausting cycle where you're constantly performing, constantly trying to impress, constantly seeking the next hit of validation. You choose experiences, purchases, and even relationships based on how they'll look to others rather than how they feel to you. You lose touch with your own preferences, your own joy, your own sense of what makes life meaningful. The people who feed into this pattern aren't necessarily doing it maliciously. They might genuinely enjoy celebrating your successes or sharing in your excitement. But if you notice that your relationship with them is built primarily on this external sharing rather than deep connection and understanding, it's a sign that the dynamic is slowly destroying your ability to find satisfaction within yourself. You might notice that when you achieve something but can't share it immediately, the joy feels incomplete. When you're going through a difficult time but don't want to broadcast it, you feel isolated and alone. When you make decisions that feel right to you but don't look impressive to others, you second-guess yourself. This dependency on external validation keeps you trapped in a constant state of anxiety and insecurity because you can never control how others perceive you. You're building your emotional foundation on shifting sand. And deep down, you know it's not sustainable. The sixth sign manifests as exhaustion disguised as social obligation. You weary yourself out with social obligations for the sake of good company or external appearances. Droz observed that many people voluntarily weary themselves out of 3/4 of their life, attending tiresome visits, ceremonies, and parties, justifying it by claiming they must mix with good company. This isn't about genuine connection or joy. This is about showing up to places and events that drain your energy because you feel you should, because you want to maintain an image, or because you're afraid of what people will think if you don't participate. You know this sign is present in your life when you find yourself saying yes to invitations that make your heart sink. When you spend weekends running from one social obligation to another, arriving home more exhausted than you left. When you realize you've been attending events not because they bring you joy, but because you feel guilty about disappointing others. The people who create this dynamic often use guilt, expectation, and social pressure to ensure your participation. They might say things like, "But you have to come, it won't be the same without you," or "I thought you cared about me," when you try to decline. They've learned that your desire to be seen as a good friend, family member, or colleague can be leveraged to secure your presence even when it costs you your peace. What's particularly insidious about this pattern is how it's often disguised as love or inclusion. The people making these demands might genuinely believe they're being kind by including you. But if your participation feels mandatory rather than optional, if declining creates drama or guilt trips, if you feel more like a prop than a person in these gatherings, then your social circle is slowly destroying your autonomy and joy. You might notice that you're constantly busy but rarely fulfilled, that your calendar is full but your heart feels empty, that you have many acquaintances but few people who truly know and accept you. This is what happens when you prioritize appearing social over being authentic. The seventh and final sign is when you allow idle or officious people to drain your time and energy. Droz lamented that while the idle rob us of hours, we ourselves sacrifice years. This is about recognizing that your time and energy are finite resources, and some people will consume them endlessly if you let them. These are the people who call you when they're bored, expecting you to entertain them, who dump their problems on you repeatedly without ever implementing solutions or showing genuine appreciation for your support, who interrupt your day with non-urgent matters because they know you'll respond, who take up space in your life without adding any value to it. The challenge with this sign is that these people often aren't malicious. They might be genuinely struggling, lonely, or simply unaware of boundaries. But their impact on your life is the same, regardless of their intentions. They drain your emotional reserves, interrupt your flow, and prevent you from using your energy for what truly matters to you. You know this pattern is affecting you when you feel like you never have time for your own priorities. When you're constantly putting out other people's fires while your own dreams and goals sit on the back burner. When you realize you know intimate details about other people's problems, but haven't made progress on your own healing and growth. The people who create this dynamic often have an uncanny ability to sense when you're available and immediately fill that space with their needs. They might call right when you sit down to relax, text when you're trying to focus on important work, or show up at your door when you've finally carved out time for yourself. What makes this particularly challenging is that setting boundaries with these people often triggers guilt. They might accuse you of being selfish, unavailable, or not caring about them. They've learned that your compassion and desire to help can be used to override your own needs and priorities. But here's what you need to understand. Allowing people to consistently drain your time and energy isn't kindness, it's enabling. You're not helping them grow stronger or more capable. You're teaching them that their time and needs are more important than yours, and you're depriving yourself of the energy you need to create the life you actually want. Now that we've identified these 7 signs, you might be feeling overwhelmed or even hopeless. Maybe you're recognizing patterns in multiple relationships and wondering how you got so far off track. Maybe you're realizing that people you love dearly are actually contributing to your destruction, and that truth feels almost unbearable. Take a deep breath. Recognition is always the first step toward freedom. Droz understood that once we see these destructive dynamics clearly, we can begin to counteract them and foster what he called emotional survival. The path forward isn't about becoming hard or cynical. It's not about cutting everyone out of your life or building walls around your heart. It's about cultivating what Droz called inner tranquility and self-reliance. It's about recognizing that your happiness depends on you, not on your ability to manage other people's emotions or meet their endless expectations. True emotional survival begins when you stop trying to fix, please, or control others and start focusing on your own healing and growth. It means learning to find that vast and serene horizon by escaping what Droz called the yoke of opinion. It means discovering the pleasures of repose and independence through occasional retreat from the chaos of others' demands. This doesn't mean becoming isolated or cold. It means becoming selective. It means understanding that not everyone deserves access to your energy, your time, or your peace. It means recognizing that some relationships, no matter how long they've existed or how much history you share, are simply incompatible with your well-being. Droz emphasized the importance of cultivating those virtues which diffuse a charm over life and learning to love our kind. But notice he said, our kind. This suggests that we need to find our tribe, our people, those who operate from similar values and who enhance rather than diminish our light. The relationships that nourish you will feel different. In them, you won't need to constantly explain yourself or defend your choices. You won't feel drained after spending time together. You won't walk away questioning your worth or wondering what you did wrong. Instead, you'll feel seen, accepted, and energized by the connection. As you begin to recognize and distance yourself from destructive relationships, you'll likely face resistance. People who have benefited from your accommodating nature won't appreciate your new boundaries. They might accuse you of changing, becoming selfish, or not caring about them anymore. This is where Droz's wisdom about developing strength of character becomes crucial. You need the courage to endure anything, including the discomfort of being misunderstood by people who never truly understood you anyway. When faced with the painful but necessary work of protecting your peace, you must concentrate your mental energy and settle into your solitary powers of endurance. Remember, you're not responsible for other people's emotions or reactions to your boundaries. You're only responsible for treating others with basic kindness and respect while maintaining your own integrity and well-being. If someone can't accept your boundaries, that tells you more about them than it does about you. The practice of what Droz called indulgence and sympathy must be applied wisely. Yes, we should cultivate compassion for others' struggles and maintain our sensitivity to suffering, but we must never again become victims of others' opinions or demands. We can care about people without sacrificing ourselves for them. One of the most important shifts you can make is learning to value time differently. Droz urged us to recognize the value of these fractions of time, which are the material of life. Every moment you spend in relationships that diminish you is a moment stolen from your potential for growth, joy, and authentic connection. This doesn't mean every interaction needs to be profound or transformative, but it does mean that the overall impact of your relationships should be positive. You should feel more like yourself when you're around the right people, not less. You should feel supported in becoming who you're meant to be, not pressured to remain who you've always been. As you begin to implement these changes, you might experience loneliness. This is normal and temporary. Droz understood that the path to authentic happiness sometimes requires retreat, requires keeping off the crowd of officious and indolent people who steal our time and energy. But this loneliness is different from the emptiness you felt while surrounded by people who were slowly destroying you. This is the loneliness of someone who has chosen themselves, who has decided that their peace is worth protecting, who has finally stopped betraying their own soul for the comfort of others. In this space of intentional solitude, you'll begin to remember who you are beneath all the accommodating and people-pleasing. You'll rediscover your own thoughts, feelings, and preferences. You'll start to trust yourself again because you've proven that you're willing to protect what matters most. And eventually, from this place of wholeness and self-respect, you'll attract relationships that truly nourish you. Droz taught that friendship can only be purchased by friendship. When you become a true friend to yourself, you'll recognize and attract others who can offer genuine friendship in return. The path of emotional survival isn't easy, but it's necessary. Every day you continue to allow destructive people to drain your energy is another day stolen from the life you're meant to live. Every moment you spend trying to please those who will never be satisfied is a moment you could have spent creating something beautiful. You have permission to choose yourself. You have permission to protect your peace. You have permission to say no to relationships that diminish your light, even if others don't understand or approve of your choices. The people who are meant to be in your life will respect your boundaries and celebrate your growth. Those who resist your healing were never truly your people anyway. Trust the process, trust yourself, and remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in your own destruction. Your life is waiting for you on the other side of these toxic patterns. Your peace is waiting for you beyond the need for others' approval. Your joy is waiting for you in the space you create when you finally stop allowing others to slowly destroy what matters most. The choice is yours. The power has always been yours. It's time to use it.